She was an ordinary woman leading a simple life. But the moment Irma Grese entered the Nazi camp system, she became something survivors would struggle to describe for the rest of their lives. Until 1945, when everything she had become finally caught up with her, and the final hours that followed shocked the world. Irma was born on October 7, 1923, in the small village of Wrechen in northern Germany. Her father, Alfred Grese, worked as a dairy farmer, and the family lived a strict rural life. Germany during the 1920s and early 1930s was filled with instability. Inflation destroyed savings, unemployment spread everywhere, and many Germans blamed their suffering on the defeat of World War I. Political violence became common in the streets. The Nazi Party used that anger to build support by promising to restore Germany's pride and power. By the time Irma was growing up, Nazi propaganda was becoming part of everyday life in schools, newspapers, radio broadcasts, and youth organizations. Irma's childhood was not especially remarkable at first, but inside the Grese household, things slowly became unstable. Her mother, Berta Grese, struggled with depression for years. In 1936, when Irma was only 13 years old, her mother took her own life by drinking hydrochloric acid. That moment changed the atmosphere inside the family completely. Friends and relatives later described the household as cold, tense, and emotionally distant afterward. Her father reportedly became stricter, and the emotional support inside the family seemed to disappear almost entirely. At the same time, Germany itself was changing rapidly under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The Nazis targeted young people aggressively because they understood that controlling children and teenagers meant controlling Germany's future. Organizations like the League of German Girls were designed to shape teenagers into loyal followers of Nazi ideology. Girls were taught discipline, obedience, physical fitness, and loyalty to the state above everything else. Irma joined youth programs during her teenage years and became fascinated by the power, uniforms, and promises of status they offered. School never interested her much. She left formal education around age 15 and took small jobs afterwards, including working on farms and later in a shop. Life for working-class girls in Nazi Germany was limited in many ways, and the regime constantly pushed women toward roles that served the state. She also briefly tried training as a nurse at the Hohenlichen Sanatorium, a medical facility associated with the SS. The hospital itself had close ties to Nazi leadership and SS operations, but she reportedly struggled there and never became a proper nurse. Some reports suggest she lacked the discipline and skill needed for medical work. Even so, the experience exposed her more directly to the growing SS system that controlled much of Nazi Germany's machinery. As the Second World War expanded across Europe after Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, opportunities for young German women changed dramatically. Millions of German men were sent into military service, creating labor shortages across the country. The SS increasingly recruited female guards for concentration camps because the camp population kept expanding as Germany occupied more territory. The work promised authority, food, clothing, wages, and status during wartime Germany. For some women, especially those from poor or difficult backgrounds, it also offered power that they had never experienced before. By 1942, at only 18 years old, Irma volunteered for service within the SS camp system. She arrived at Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp built specifically for women inside Nazi Germany. By then, the camp system was already expanding at terrifying speed. Thousands of prisoners from occupied countries were being transported into camps every month as the war intensified. Political prisoners, resistance fighters, Jews, Roma women, and many others were being sent into the Nazi prison network from across Europe. Ravensbrück became the training ground for many female SS guards, known as Aufseherinnen. Women there learned camp discipline, prisoner control, and the brutal routines that defined concentration camp life. The guards were expected to obey orders without hesitation. Violence became normal almost immediately. New guards quickly learned that showing weakness or sympathy toward prisoners was discouraged and could even damage their careers inside the SS system. At the camp, prisoners already lived under horrific conditions. Overcrowding, starvation, disease, forced labor, and constant beatings were part of daily existence. Guards carried whips, sticks, and pistols while enforcing discipline through fear. Small mistakes could lead to severe punishment. Prisoners could be beaten for walking too slowly, speaking without permission, or simply appearing exhausted after endless labor shifts. Some women worked hours in factories supporting the German war effort, while surviving on tiny food rations that barely kept them alive. Irma adapted to this environment fast. Within months, she reportedly became known for violent punishments and aggressive behavior toward inmates. She beat prisoners with braided cellophane whips and forced women to stand outside for long periods during freezing weather. Some testimonies described her setting dogs on prisoners during roll call or work details. Other former inmates later claimed she took part in humiliating punishments meant to terrorize prisoners psychologically as much as physically. The atmosphere inside Ravensbrück hardened many guards over time. Constant exposure to suffering, combined with Nazi racial ideology and the absolute power guards held over prisoners, created an environment where brutality became routine. In 1943, Irma was transferred to a place far worse than Ravensbrück. She was sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. By the time she arrived, the camp had already become a machine of industrial death. The Auschwitz complex actually consisted of multiple camps, but Auschwitz II-Birkenau became the center of mass extermination. Trains packed with Jewish prisoners from all across Europe arrived constantly from countries including Hungary, Poland, France, the Netherlands, Greece, and Czechoslovakia. Families were crammed into cattle cars for days with little water, almost no food, and barely any air. Many prisoners arrived already dead before the train doors even opened. Men, women, and children were unloaded onto crowded railway ramps, where SS officers carried out selections within minutes. Those considered fit for labor were sent into the camp system. The elderly, sick, disabled, and many mothers with children were often sent directly to gas chambers, disguised as shower facilities. Prisoners usually had no idea what was about to happen. Many believed they were simply being taken for disinfection or medical processing. The scale of killing at Auschwitz was enormous. More than 1 million people would eventually die there. Smoke from crematoria regularly filled the air, while ash settled across nearby areas. Prisoners later described the smell of burning bodies hanging over the camp almost constantly. Inside this environment, Irma rose rapidly through the ranks. Despite being only around 20 years old, she became senior supervisor over sections of female prisoners at Auschwitz-Birkenau. That position gave her direct control over thousands of inmates. She worked under senior SS personnel who expected discipline and efficiency, while the extermination system operated day and night. She was involved in savage beatings, random violence, humiliations, and participation in selections for the gas chambers. Survivors described her as carrying a pistol and whip while walking through prisoner barracks. Several women later testified that she appeared calm and relaxed while overseeing scenes of starvation and death. Some former inmates claimed she targeted especially weak prisoners because they could not defend themselves. Testimonies also accused her of forcing exhausted women to carry heavy stones or stand for endless roll calls in freezing weather. The atmosphere inside Birkenau itself was beyond horrifying. Barracks were overcrowded with lice, disease, and almost no sanitation. Food portions were tiny and often consisted of watery soup and small pieces of bread. Typhus outbreaks spread rapidly through prisoner sections. Corpses often remained visible near barracks before removal crews arrived. Every day, prisoners watched selections that could send friends or family members toward the gas chambers. Fear became part of ordinary life because nobody knew whether they would survive the next morning. As the Soviet army pushed westward in 1944, Auschwitz became increasingly chaotic. Nazi officials tried desperately to continue camp operations while hiding evidence of mass murder. Crematoria records were destroyed. Some facilities were dismantled. Thousands of prisoners were transferred deeper into Germany as Soviet forces approached Poland. These evacuations later became known as death marches, because countless prisoners died from exhaustion, shooting, starvation, and freezing weather during the forced movements westward. During this period, Grese was transferred once again. This time she was sent to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. When she arrived at Bergen-Belsen in early 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing fast. The Eastern Front had shattered under the Soviet advance. Cities across Germany were being destroyed by Allied bombing. Fuel shortages crippled transportation systems. Millions of refugees fled westward, while German military leadership struggled to stop complete defeat. Entire regions of Germany were falling into chaos as roads filled with retreating soldiers, civilians, and displaced people trying to escape the advancing armies. Inside the concentration camp system, conditions became catastrophic. Bergen-Belsen had originally been established as a detention and exchange camp, but by 1945, it turned into a nightmare of overcrowding and disease after massive prisoner evacuations from camps further east. Tens of thousands of prisoners arrived with almost no food, medicine, or shelter available. Many had already survived brutal transport journeys packed into rail cars for days without proper supplies. Bodies piled up faster than burial crews could handle them. Irma served under Camp Commandant Josef Kramer, a man already notorious for his role at Auschwitz. Prisoners later referred to him as the Beast of Belsen. Kramer had already spent years inside the concentration camp system and had overseen extermination operations before arriving at Bergen-Belsen. On April 15, 1945, British forces from the 11th Armored Division finally reached Bergen-Belsen. What they found shocked even hardened soldiers who had already witnessed years of war. Around 60,000 prisoners remained alive inside the camp, many slowly dying from starvation and disease. Thousands of corpses lay unburied across the grounds. The smell of death covered the entire area. British soldiers later described the camp as quieter than expected because so many prisoners were too weak to even speak or react properly. Some soldiers became physically sick after walking through the camp. Others later said the images stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Medical officers immediately realized the disaster was far beyond a normal military situation. It was a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in front of them. British soldiers, journalists, and medical personnel documented what they saw with cameras almost immediately. The footage captured at Bergen-Belsen would later become some of the most horrifying real images ever recorded from Nazi concentration camps. Piles of bodies filled roads and open spaces. Starving prisoners wandered through the camp in striped uniforms hanging loosely from their skeletal bodies. The British forced German guards and SS personnel to help bury bodies and clean sections of the camp. Meanwhile, Germany itself officially surrendered on May 8, 1945. The Third Reich had collapsed. Millions were dead across Europe. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. Nazi leaders were either captured, fleeing, or committing suicide. Adolf Hitler had already killed himself in Berlin on April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops closed in around the city. High-ranking Nazi officials scrambled to escape responsibility, while Allied forces uncovered more camps and mass graves across Europe. Now, attention turned toward punishment. In September 1945, only a few months after the war ended, British military authorities opened one of the first major war crimes trials connected to the concentration camps. The proceedings became known as the Belsen trial. It took place in the German city of Lüneburg, inside a British military court. 45 defendants stood accused, including SS guards, camp officials, and medical personnel from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and Auschwitz concentration camp. The trial lasted from September through November 1945 and quickly attracted international attention because the world was still trying to understand the full scale of Nazi atrocities. Among them sat Irma Grese. Newspapers quickly became fascinated by her case because of her age and appearance. Reporters often described her as attractive, blonde, and unusually young for someone accused of such horrifying crimes. British tabloids gave her nicknames like the Blonde Beast and the hyena of Auschwitz. Many newspapers focused heavily on the contrast between her youthful appearance and the terrifying testimony presented against her. But inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was far from sensational entertainment. Survivors gave devastating testimony. Former prisoners identified her directly. Many became emotional while testifying because they were describing horrors they had survived only months earlier. Many had lost entire families inside the camps. Others still showed visible signs of starvation and illness while speaking in court. Those testimonies gave the public one of the first detailed looks into everyday life inside the Nazi concentration camp system. The trial also exposed the scale of death inside Bergen-Belsen during the final months of the war. Tens of thousands had died there from starvation, disease, neglect, and abuse. Prosecutors presented photographs and camp records showing the catastrophic conditions British troops encountered after liberation. British prosecutors argued that camp personnel could not escape responsibility simply by claiming they followed orders. The court aimed to establish personal accountability for crimes committed inside the Nazi camp system. This became one of the most important legal questions after the war because so many former Nazi officials tried defending themselves by saying they had merely obeyed superiors. Irma denied many accusations during questioning. She admitted serving as a guard, but tried minimizing her role in violence and killings. Still, prosecutors presented witness after witness connecting her to brutal treatment of prisoners. The public followed the case closely across Europe and beyond. Newspapers printed courtroom sketches and reports almost daily. For many ordinary people still trying to understand the horrors uncovered after the war, the Belsen trial became one of the first detailed glimpses into how concentration camps operated. As the weeks passed, the evidence continued piling up, and eventually, the judges reached their decision. On November 17, 1945, the verdicts were delivered. Several defendants received prison sentences. Others were acquitted. But 11 people were condemned to death by hanging for war crimes connected to Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. One of them was Irma Grese. She was only 22 years old by then. The sentence shocked many people, partly because of her age. The judges concluded that the crimes committed inside the camps were so severe that harsh punishment was unavoidable. The court believed Irma had willingly participated in the abuse and mistreatment of prisoners, rather than simply existing inside the system without involvement. She reportedly reacted calmly when hearing the death sentence. Unlike some defendants who broke down emotionally after the verdicts, she appeared controlled, according to several reports from the courtroom. That reaction only added to the public fascination around the case. After the trial ended, the condemned prisoners were transferred to Hamelin prison in Germany to await execution. British executioner Albert Pierrepoint was assigned to carry out the hangings. Pierrepoint had already executed many criminals before the war, but the Nazi executions after 1945 would become some of the most historically significant of his career. Over time, he'd become one of the most famous executioners in British history. Inside prison, Irma's behavior reportedly remained composed. Guards later described her as controlled and emotionally detached much of the time. She spent her final weeks under heavy scrutiny while appeals failed. The condemned prisoners were kept isolated as British authorities finalized preparations for the executions. Outside the prison walls, the world was still processing the full scale of Nazi atrocities. Allied investigators continued uncovering camps, mass graves, and extermination evidence across Europe. The Nuremberg trials against senior Nazi leaders were also beginning around the same time, putting the leadership of the Third Reich itself on trial before the world. Eventually, the final date for execution was set for December 13, 1945. During the early hours of that day, staff at Hamelin prison prepared for one of the most infamous executions. Irma spent her final night inside a prison cell along other condemned prisoners from the Belsen trial. Albert Pierrepoint and his assistant arrived to oversee the hangings. Everything followed a strict schedule. The condemned prisoners were weighed so the correct rope length would be prepared for each execution. This was done to ensure the drop would break the neck quickly rather than cause prolonged strangulation. Pierrepoint later became known for carrying out executions with cold efficiency and speed. He believed the process should happen quickly with as little delay as possible. Irma reportedly appeared calm during her final hours. Accounts from prison personnel described her walking steadily toward the execution chamber when her turn arrived. She wore prison clothing and showed little outward panic, according to later reports from witnesses present inside the prison. Some accounts later claimed she tried maintaining confidence until the very end, though historians still debate parts of the final moments because different witnesses remember events differently. The execution chamber itself was small and heavily controlled. Guards escorted prisoners one at a time to the gallows. Once inside, Pierrepoint worked quickly. Hands were secured. A hood was placed over the prisoner's head. The noose was tightened into position. Then the trapdoor opened. Irma Grese became one of the youngest women executed under British law during the 20th century. The executions of the condemned Belsen personnel continued, one after another that same morning, including Camp Commandant Josef Kramer. By the end of the process, the British had carried out all 11 death sentences from the trial. News of the executions spread rapidly through international newspapers. For many survivors, the hangings represented a small measure of justice after unimaginable suffering. Families who had lost relatives inside Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen saw the executions as proof that at least some personnel would face punishment for what happened during the war. Even after her execution, Irma's story did not disappear. Decades later, documentaries, historians, and war crime researchers still study cases like hers to understand how ordinary people became participants in one of history's greatest atrocities.